Hey everybody, I'm Vinny Francois, and this is Vinny's live stream lectures. I'm going to be talking about improv a little bit, and this is going to be a short little episode, just about 15 minutes of me talking, and then 15 minutes of I'm going to open it up to Q&A on the chat, or take a question. I already got one lined up from Facebook, so if anybody has anything to add, I'm happy to answer them at the end of the lecture part, or if someone wants to post something in the chat. That's great too. So basically, today's lecture is about failure and what that means in terms of improv in a scene or as an improviser, or just how do we deal with this and uh, how do we get through it? So the first thing I like to do when I talk about failure with an improv class um, is that there's an exercise that I like called 1, 2, 3. And it's very simple. I get everybody to pair off into pairs, obviously, and I ask them to just count back and forth from 1 to 3 in a loop. So it usually goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and they just go back and forth as often, and I ask them to kind of push themselves, see how fast they can go. And once they're doing that, it just goes back and forth, and inevitably they mess up. And it's kind of funny to watch because people think, how hard can counting to 3 be? But it's pretty straightforward in general if you're doing it on your own. But when you're working with someone else, it can be tricky to get the timing right, and you have to be paying attention and really listening and attentive to what's happening without trying to think too far ahead. And that's usually in improv what gets people in trouble. So you ask them to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and let it go for a while, and they're giggling and messing up, and it's pretty fun to watch as a teacher for sure. And after a while you stop them and like ask them how it went, and they usually like, oh boy, it's harder than I thought, or they're like, that's kind of fun, or like no problem for some people. And so then the second step of this exercise is to replace them saying the number 2 with a clap of the hands. And so the exercise then goes 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. And usually people are like, oh, this shouldn't be too bad, but it is definitely tricky. It's much harder to get it exactly right. And people mess up all the time, and they fail at this exercise. And it's an exercise designed to make you fail. It's hard to do. And they're laughing at themselves and at each other, and it messes everybody up because it's hard to switch from saying 2 to clapping your hands. No, there's always some people who don't have a problem with it, and that's fine too, but 99% of the time it messes people up. So after they've done that for a while and they've struggled with it and had to laugh, I make it even harder. And so the third step of the exercise is to replace the 3 with like a stomp of the foot. So it goes 1, 1. See, I'm messing it up right now. 1, 1. And I'm just doing this on my own. So doing this back and forth, and especially after having done it 1, 2, 3, your brain kind of wants to count it out loud, and it's shifting from your verbal to your physical parts of your brain, and you mess up. And people, again, they're having a good time and they're laughing at themselves over goofing up what should be a simple exercise, counting to 3 and clapping your hands. That seems straightforward. But you mess up, you fail. And at the end of the exercise, it's like I just asked the class, did you laugh? Raise your hand if you laughed. And invariably, the vast majority of the class raises their hand. And then I asked them, at what point did you laugh? And some people are like, but eventually someone says, when I messed up. And that's the lesson for me. Like, there's a lot of lessons you can pull out of this exercise, but the one that I enjoy the most is that you laugh at your failures on stage or off stage. And when you're learning something, you're going to mess up. And if you have the attitude, the spirit that you're laughing at your mess ups and you're laughing at the difficulty, then you're going to be able to get through it. If you're enjoying the playfulness of what you're learning, then it becomes a pleasant experience. And if you really want to get it right, some people just, they want to get it right. They can't make mistakes. That becomes difficult for them. But this exercise it kind of helps people relax about making mistakes. And I asked them to think about what they were laughing. It wasn't a mean-spirited laugh, wasn't laughing at the other person, because you're doing it too. You're messing up. And so if both people are messing up, then we're in it together. We're both learning this together and we're failing together. Something that seems like it should be simple isn't that simple. And it's really fun to watch people kind of make that discovery that failure can be fun, can be pleasurable if you do it with a spirit of play. And that's most of what I have my classes do, is to play. And I ask them to retain that lessons. Like, look, we're going to be doing a bunch of difficult things and you're going to mess it up. And just remember that you laughed at it when you messed up. When everyone else is messing up and you're all just goofing up together, that's great. That's a really fun way to approach improv and learning improv. I know Jill Bernard has this great exercise called Failure Ball, where she has everyone line up in a circle and pick up a ball, like an imaginary ball, and you mime it and you throw it, and the person can't catch it. You automatically drop it or it misses. Whatever it is, you fail at the attempt of catching the ball. And when you've dropped the ball, everybody else in the circle applauds and cheers and encourages you as though you did a great thing. And so it builds up this real team spirit of positivity, of failing to catch the ball. And so then the person who dropped the ball, quote unquote, dropped the ball, takes another ball or picks it up and throws it to the next person. And they subsequently fail to catch the ball. They drop it, they miss it, whatever. And everybody else cheers and claps and hoots and hollers. And you really need to have a spirit of play and fun in failure in improv. When you're learning improv, it's tough. It can be a very difficult road to go down. At the beginning, it's fun and you don't know what's happening and you're having a great time. But the more you do it, the more frustrating you can get, the more difficult it can seem, and you get really fed up at learning and like, why can't I get this? Why aren't I getting better? And one of the things that I think helps explain that is that as you get better at improv, you slowly develop higher expectations for yourself. You develop a better taste in like your own improv and other people's improv, and you see more improv and say like, oh, improv is capable of this. How do I get there? How can I reach those? Like, oh, that great show. I want to do a really great show just like the one I saw. And we can get frustrated with ourselves if we don't meet those standards. And partly it's us being very hard on ourselves. We're taught to like certainly be as high achieving and get everything right as possible. But I think even for the most patient and understanding improviser, you can get fed up. You can get really frustrated. You're like, how I've been doing this so long. How come I'm not getting better? And my theory, I don't know if this is mine. I probably heard it from someone else. Let's just say it's not mine. The improviser is getting better over time, but what happens is that you're learning faster than you're getting better. And so there's this level of I'm getting better. You can't see this if you're listening to this on an audio only, but your level of getting better as a performer increases slowly, but your knowledge and your taste and your expectations for yourself gets better faster. So as time goes on, your ability increases slowly, but your knowledge and expectation increases quickly. So there's a gap that develops between your ability to do improv and your expectations for yourself to do improv. And over time, that you're not getting better faster than your taste is developing. Your taste and your expectations go way faster than your ability. And so the gap between your expectations and your ability gets bigger over time. So even though your ability keeps increasing slowly, your expectations for yourself increases rapidly. And that gap gets bigger over time. And so it can feel like I'm getting worse at improv. But the reality is you are getting better. It's just slower. It's slower than your expectations for yourself. And so feeling like, oh, I'm not getting better, I'm failing at this show isn't working, or these workshops aren't working, or I'm not doing the kind of work I really want to do. That's totally normal. It is a part of learning, and it arises naturally out of the fact that you will learn intellectually better and faster than you are able to reproduce and cope and copy what you see and develop your own voice and style on stage. And I think that applies to any form of learning. If you take up piano or drawing, you see art and you're like, okay, I'm going to make my hand to draw this thing, but you draw so slow, you get so frustrated at like how slow the progress is. But that's partly because like you see more, you get into any field of creativity, the more you learn about it, naturally the expectations go up. So it's really easy to get frustrated with yourself. Like, I'm not getting better, I'm not improving. The reality is you are improving very slowly. Unfortunately, that's the nature of learning. One of my favorite Keith Johnstone kind of quotes is that he says, like, it can take you 1,000 drawings of a face before you find one that you're happy with. But the only way to get there is to do the first 999. And so you have to have the good improvisers, the people who really learn to do well in any field, are the people who can stomach getting through 999 bad, subpar, failed, quote unquote, drawings of a face. And you have to be able to kind of just power through being or feeling like you're not doing the work that you want to do, or feeling like a failure. The reality is you're getting better. It's inevitable. The more you do something, you inevitably get better. And it may be imperceptible, and it may be feel like you're taking steps back sometime. And that's true. If you drew 999 faces, every one is not going to be incrementally better. Some of them are going to be worse than others, and some of them are going to be much worse than others, and some of them are going to be much better. As you try to reproduce that, no, you're still back at a certain level. So learning is a slow process. It involves a lot of failure. And so how do you cope with that is just accepting that that's a byproduct of the process of learning. Learning involves failure, and it's hard. It's very hard, especially if you do it a long time. You do it for a year, 2 years, you feel like, how come I'm not getting to the point where I feel like I should be? And it's just a consequence of some people. It only takes them 800 drawings to draw a good face, and some people only takes them 500 drawings to draw a good face. And there's people who only take 100 drawings to draw a good face, and those people are, ridiculous, and I envy them. But it took me, 999 plus drawings to draw a good face. I can't draw, but in improv, it just takes a long time to learn, and not meeting your own expectations is part of that learning. And one of the things that helps me kind of frame learning in a way that makes a lot of sense to me as a teacher. I've been teaching improv for over 20 years at this point. And it's this model, I got it written here. Martin Broadwell was, I guess, the first person to express it. And it's the 4 stages of learning. And I feel like they capture it pretty well. And the 4 stages go as such. You go through unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And what does that mean? So we have the 2 aspects. We have the conscious, unconscious, and the competent, incompetent. So when you're first starting out, you're unconscious and incompetent, or unconsciously incompetent. Hopefully you're not unconscious while you're learning improv. You're incompetent in that you're not great at improv the first day you step out. It's fun. You don't have to be good to enjoy improv. But level 1 students, they're not great at improv, but they don't know. They may not have ever even seen improv. They don't know much about the theories or the structures of improv, or whatever system might work best for them, or even formats and all these things that we learn as advanced improvisers. We're unconscious about how bad we are at improv. And so it's fun. Just like little kids who, play sports, when they see like 5-year-olds playing soccer, they don't know that they're not, a team of 5-year-olds will get crushed by a professional soccer team, right? They're not objectively not a good soccer team, but they're having fun anyways. They're unconscious about their incompetence. However, I think there's like a YouTube video of like 100 like grade 1s versus 3 professional soccer players. That's a really fun video. Check that out if you find it. But they're having fun. They don't know how bad they are. And level 1 students are having a blast. They love doing improv. And, usually your curricula, when you're teaching people who are starting out improv, it's geared around that. You want them to have a fun time. You want them to embrace and kind of slowly pick up the principles of whatever improv system suits you. And you're unconsciously incompetent, and you're having a great time. And then the more you do it, you slowly go through these classes, go through whatever workshops, or just get more experience, you become conscious of your incompetence. And this is a difficult stage. you realize, oh, I'm not great. I'm making these mistakes, or the scene didn't work. Why didn't it work? And you slowly dawns on you, like, oh, I'm not great at improv. I'm not like, knocking out killer scenes like every single time. Not that that's the standard, but you feel it. You feel how not great at improv you are at a certain point. Just the more you do it, you're like, oh, didn't feel great. And why is that? And we slowly develop an awareness of how incompetent, quote unquote, we are. And so we enter that stage of conscious incompetence, and we feel like, ugh, this is tough. And that's probably the longest stage of learning improv. Is you are conscious of how not great, you don't meet that expectation that you have for yourself, and that's a tough way to get through. And it feels like a failure. Feel like you're having a really tough time. But eventually you get to the third stage, which is conscious competence. And that's a stage where you are really aware of what you're doing on stage, and you kind of like get in your head a little bit. You become very analytical about it, or at least some people can be. And there's always people who are very instinctive and reactive, and great, that's an amazing place to be. But once you reach conscious competence, you start doing good scenes more regularly. You start to feel like, oh, I did that on purpose, and then it worked, and then we're both working together, and like we connected, and it was great, and that feels wonderful. And we hit this conscious competence stage, but we still have to really kind of concentrate and be kind of hyper aware and analytical about it. And you're still, you're not nailing every scene. I mean, improv is improv, and even the greatest baseball player misses a bunch of baseball swings, right? So you're succeeding at a rate that feels good, but you have to like kind of it feels like work. It feels like you have to be super aware, and you're very consciously competent. It's like a kid riding a bicycle who's really fixated, and they're white knuckling on the handlebars, and they're concentrating on their legs and pumping, and they can go straight, and then they can kind of turn, but they're not really playing. You're not playing at that point. You're working. You're doing the thing that makes it work, and you're like, okay, this was a solid improv scene, and it worked, and everyone enjoyed it, and great. But if you come off, you're like, I'm sweating. I did. You're really pushing yourself. And it's because your brain is actively making the choices. You've developed that taste, you've developed that awareness, and you've reached the stage of conscious competence. And then eventually, what you hope, is that eventually you reach the fourth stage. And the fourth stage is unconscious competence, where you've learned all of this behavior. You've learned, like, I'm listening, I'm doing all my object work, I'm creating a scene, I've got my relationship, I've established things, and all of these things that we learn as improvisers, you're doing them unconsciously. You're not even thinking about it. Someone says something to you, and you can react, and you don't have to, like, okay, if I do this and then they do that, and then okay, we'll go here, or maybe we could go there. Okay, no, wait, I shouldn't think too far ahead. Blah blah blah. All of that disappears, and you're just in the moment, and you're reacting and present. That's what all those terms mean. You're not consciously working hard about, like, following, like, okay, if I do this, then I should do that, or they did this, oh, they want me to do that. You're just reacting. It intuitively, and you're operating on an intuitive level. And that's because you put those hours on. That's because you put that work in to get through all of that stuff, and you've memorized it, and it's in the back of your head, and you don't have to consciously call it. And it's kind of like riding a bicycle. When you're first riding out, like I said, those kids are white knuckling it, but eventually you can ride a bicycle and you can have a conversation. You don't even think about, like, I got to pump my legs and turn the wheel and hold my balance. That all comes natural. That all comes second nature. Or I'm Canadian, I'm from Montreal. So if I'm talking about a hockey player, and when you're learning to skate, you're learning to see, you like, got to skate and push my legs and keep my balance, and I hold the stick. But if you're going to be a hockey player, you can't be concentrating on your skating like that all the time. It has to be subconscious. It has to be an unconscious ability. And then you can kind of like practice shooting and checking and making a pass and building that awareness of where all your teammates are. All of these things kind of combine together in an unconscious way. We've learned all these skills. I think it's called chunking in neuroscience or neuropsychology. Like, you've got a system in your brain as a process and you just send it to the brain, and the brain kind of spits it back out. You've developed your little neuron machine back there, and something comes in, and something comes right back out. You don't have to, like, concentrate on it. 3 plus 5, 8. Boom. And I don't have to be like 5 and then 6, 7, 8. That's chunking. You've memorized it. So once we've developed those abilities to get to an unconscious competence, then if that feels liberated, that's the liberated place. And sometimes you can get these glimmers of it when you're doing improv. If you do it enough, you're like, oh, it doesn't feel like it just came naturally. And that's unconscious competence. And when it feels like I wasn't even in control, and it's because you're not controlling. You've given up control to that intuitive part of your brain, and it feels great to have a great set when you've achieved that. And so going through failure is part of the process. It's the path to get to that unconscious competence. I'm going to stop the lecture part of it here, talking about failure. I'm going to take a question from Shaitan. And basically, he asked me a question on Facebook. We have a Facebook group. You can always email me at francois@montrealimprov.com to get joined to this group. Basically, let's see, here's his question. He says, I feel like once you've failed at something, there's two general means of approach. Either retry the same strategy, perhaps even adjusting it mildly, or try a drastically new approach. This may be a bit too broad for a simple answer, but I was wondering if there's some way, aside from getting super fed up, to know whether to try again or try different. Which is a great question. And unfortunately, I have a very unsatisfying answer, which is, one, it will depend on the person, and two, they're not mutually exclusive. It depends on how fed up you are. If you're trying something, let's say you're trying to learn to ride a bicycle. It's my favorite learning analogy because we've all done it, hopefully. When you're learning to ride a bicycle, you can try to learn to ride the bicycle and just get on the bicycle and go. And if you fall, you fall. Eventually, if you don't get it, you can get very frustrated. I have two kids, and one of them had a really tough time learning to ride the bicycle and got very frustrated. And so we just said, you know what, let's just take a break. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll try again. And because you're not at your best when you're frustrated, when your emotions are running high, you're really not super rational. Everything feels heightened, and it's not a great state to be making decisions. So you got to bring yourself back to just like a more calm and centered state. So if you're really frustrated, it's the worst time to make a decision on how you should continue. Take a breath, take a step away, and then come back and try again. And if you notice yourself falling into this pattern of you're constantly getting fed up, that's the time to try something different. All right, well, this system, this method, this approach isn't working, then change it. That's the time to change it. I'd say keep repeating until you can, this isn't working. At some point, it's your own judgment. This isn't working, try something different. So if you're doing, trying to work on your characters and you try and you're like, oh, these characters are all coming out the same, and then it's try something different. Take a character workshop or talk to a teacher and be like, all right, what are some other exercises? What are some tips? And then be like, all right, I'm going to try that. I'm just going to pick one body part and emphasize that. And now I'm going to go upstage and go on stage and do my set. And I'm just going to, emphasize this walk. I'm just going to have this walk dictate kind of or influence and inspire my character. And then if that works, if you have that presence of mind and you do it and it's like, oh, that worked, then okay, great. But if eventually you drop it and you're not paying attention, then you got to try something else. Find another way to keep breaking yourself out of habits. And that's essentially what improv is. We want to operate intuitively. And so we operate out of habit because it's simple. We don't have to think about it. And breaking our own habits is tough. And so, whatever system people have for doing that is going to be the best system for you. So if you notice that just brute force repetition doesn't work for you, change it. If you know that changing your system doesn't work for you, then and just persevering through it works for you, then go with that. There's no one size fits all kind of method of attack of feeling I'm hitting a wall. How do I get through this? It's perseverance, and part of perseverance is just being willing to change tack. I'm all right, I got to get around this obstacle. Do I go over? Do I go under? Do I go around? Sometimes you just bulldoze your way through. That's probably the best answer for that. Okay, looks like we got a related question. So go ahead. I think the Shaitan's in the chat. I'm happy to take the related question. And I'll go check on Facebook while I wait to see if there are any other questions. I see people typing, so I'm just going to wait a little bit more. I mean, it's kind of tough to give specific specific advice to everybody. It's so personal. Follow-up question. In improv, we have this idea we have to be in the moment and not planning ahead, thinking outside. And how does this fit in with the idea of conscious competence? For instance, recently I've been trying to go into rehearsals workshop thinking, for instance, okay, I want to focus on my object work. But as soon as I enter the scene, it goes out the window. That's a great question. More. It's frustrating because this aspect of cultivating skill and staying in the moment feels at odds with each other. That's 100% true. Being consciously aware of what you're doing is kind of antithetical to being in the moment. But here's what I would say to that is that when you're workshopping, you're building skills. You want to be consciously working on a skill when you're in a workshop or when you're practicing. So you see soccer players practicing free kicks. They're just practicing free kicks. They're kick, kick, kick. Then they switch to their other foot, kick, kick, kick. They're taking shots on the goalie. They're taking passes. Those are when you're consciously working a specific skill. And when you're working on a skill in a workshop, that's when you want to be maximum consciousness. You want to be like, I am actively working and concentrating and focusing on this skill. And then the more you do it, the more intuitive it becomes. You building those neurons, you're training that brain to be like, all right, I'm going to consciously do this thing. And then it's in a scene, you're concentrating on the scene, and that part of your brain goes out. And so then when you come to the scene, you're like, oh, I'm just accessing that. Yeah. So I'm just following, read up the chat. So the structure the workshop so that you can work on the skill, so that when you're in an unstructured environment, that skill comes into play. Exactly. When you're I'll constantly draw the parallels between sport and improv because I find the skills, the way you learn those skills and when you apply them, feel very natural. You practice a specific skill so that you're training your brain, you're training your body, you build that muscle memory about a specific skill, whether it's storytelling or your voice, just talking loudly on a stage, or your character work, your object work, whatever skill you're in the workshop, that's what you're practicing. When you have a sports team do their practice sessions, they don't just play a game, they run specific drills, and that's because they're working specific skills. And then once you do that, it becomes intuitive. You develop those unconscious abilities to call upon them without having to think about it too much in a scene. And so that's when you're like, all of these things that you've built up, you're walking and chewing gum at the same time in an improv scene. Yeah. Well, we've hit the 30-minute mark, so I'm gonna sign off here. If anybody has any follow-up questions, you can just email me, Francois@montrealimprov.com. If you want to ask me anything about what I've said today, or you want to be notified about future lectures, or join the Facebook group where I put all these notifications, just hit me up on email. You can find me also on Twitter @VinnyFrancois. And I guess that's all. Sign off here. Hope you have a great time. Catch you guys soon. Take care.